Where do you notice God now that you didn't before?
Where do I notice him, or how? I think, well, in simple everyday things. Just when I feel a sense of enjoyment over whatever. I think of myself, okay, listen, there's a God way of understanding that, right? There are other ways of understanding it, but again, if God is real, if God exists, feeling a sense of joy, not happiness that, the sports team won, that's not that kind of joy, but it's just a sense of peace and purpose, and when you're not out to try to convince other people and grab them by the throat that, I'm right and you're wrong, which is very much a part of my whole upbringing in the Christian family. But it's just a sense of peace and wholeness and togetherness with other people, and without standing in judgment over them, sort of trying to look for something serene, I guess.
What does that mean? Yeah. I heard that word, but I didn't know what it was. Serene for me is a sense of at peace with yourself, at peace with God, at peace with other people, where you're not always prone to, let's say, competitiveness, which can happen in 1,000 different ways. So not competitive with other people, respecting other people. And I think when you're whole in yourself, you look at the world differently too. And that serene for me, it encompasses those kinds of things. What does God want?
Well, what does God want?
What's God's purpose?
How about what do you think God wants? I would say it's more living in an attitude of surrender and trust of God, which is very, very hard to do because I'm a type A personality and I like controlling the universe through my brain, and it's hard to let go of that kind of control.
How's that work?
And ego. It's excruciating, but that's okay. See, if you don't have the sword of Damocles hanging over you,
Have the what?
the sword of Damocles, it's going to come chop you in half.
Damocles, I'm going to need to use that. Can I use that with my kids somehow?
You carefully Google it first,
Okay.
but yeah, you can use it. So, if God is not fundamentally vindictive, you can work things out, and it's not like you've got to get to the right answer quickly. But it is more of as Christians have said for such a long time, it is more of a pilgrimage or journey that you're on, rather than arriving quickly at this set of propositions that are right, and if others disagree, they're just fundamentally wrong. Rather, you hold some of those beliefs maybe a little bit loosely because we're people and we have to do that. We're not omniscient, right? And so sometimes we don't know, and we're not sure, but I think that...
Can't sell this. Need certainty.
Certainty's nice, but it comes at a cost, I think, of authenticity. We don't always know, and the hard part about any type of faith is that you still have to continue trusting, like a young child trusts a parent, for example. Trust for me is that thing that I've been learning to, and still am learning to sort of walk into, which is a dying to self, like the New Testament talks about. And in that process is God. I don't think God's at the end of the rainbow. I think God is in the midst of that process, where we're, as the New Testament says, becoming more like Christ. I think that's what that's about.
In death?
In death and in life. In dying daily and rising daily.
How do you get to that rhythm? How do you go from, like you were saying, how do you go from competitiveness, from combat competitiveness to co-creation, or how do you get from wanting to be successful to growing? Could you talk a little bit about how that transformation is? I know people appreciate hearing journeys how you go.
Right. Yeah, I can only speak for
Not
myself.
That you just arrive somewhere, but how do you at least
How do you get there?
To breathe differently like that? I think you get to breathe differently because you're suffocating and you have to find another way to breathe. Pain is a wonderful thing, and I don't say that lightly, but pain does something to you that makes you sort of surrender and say, I have to find another way to live. And with me, it was like wanting to control things, whether it's family or life outside, or even like the Bible and God. And life happens. If you're paying attention to life, if you don't hold it at a distance, there are plenty of opportunities to leave and to go on that pilgrimage away from, let's call it a more childish, self-centered way of looking at faith, to something hopefully more mature, more adult-like. But that takes time, and different people do it at different paces, and that's just the way it is.
What were a couple of your deaths look like that led to new life?
Well, I mean, for me, it was, at home, it was, there was a lot of anxiety in our house, and it affected our children to a certain extent. It's nature, nurture, they came by it honestly, and it's in the genes and all that. But one of my children had a very difficult time, especially from about the age of 8 through high school years, with anxiety and depression, and I kept trying to fix her. And the more I tried to fix her, the worse it got, and the worse I felt about it, and the more out of control I felt. And she did get help that she needed, but it was a long process of letting go and of basically trusting God with a family member, rather than, okay, I got this. You don't have it, and that's a hard thing to do, right? It's like, the father trusting Jesus with the sick son in the Gospels. That's a very hard thing for parents to do. And for some parents, maybe it's easier. Maybe they reached a spiritual maturity at a far earlier age, and that's fine. But for me, I had to learn that even in my 40s too. There's a limit to what my mind can do. There's a limit to how I can wrap my head around it. And so that was a big thing. That was a big thing for me. It was disruption and dysfunction in a family that there was no way out. Nothing I could contrive could make it work.
What was revealed? Was there something new revealed about God or Christ to you?
I would say maybe deeper, not so much new, right? There was one story that was sort of one of these moments for me, these, okay, I get it, moments where my daughter, who had such difficulty in high school, and she wound up having to go to an extended program away from home for what wound up being about 15, 16 months. And it was, a wonderful experience for the family in the sense that there's a lot of healing happened. It was difficult to do, but there was a lot of healing. But anyway, before she left, she asked me if I could get her a Livestrong bracelet, one of those yellow bracelets that Lance Armstrong, can I say his name still? I guess so. Anyway, this is before all the problems came up. This is in the mid-2000s. Yeah, but so a Livestrong bracelet, because she wanted to have a bracelet when she goes away that would remind her, that there's something bigger than her taking care of her. And I was in Arizona at the time. I live in Philadelphia, but in Arizona, and I was there for a week. And she asked me, well, can you get one and bring it home? And I looked everywhere. And the thing is, these things were a hot item, and I couldn't find it anywhere. It wasn't like nobody knew what it was. Like, it's everywhere, but I can't find one. And one evening, I was at a barbecue at someone's house, and I was just thinking, I was going to call my daughter, and I can't find one. I'm sorry. I'll try to pick one up when I get home. And this guy, his name is John, and we were at his house, and he was flipping burgers, and he reached his arm out, and there he was wearing a Livestrong bracelet. And I saw it, and I said to myself, I wonder if he has another one. But then in an instant, my mind said, that's stupid. Of course he doesn't have another one. But I might ask him, where can I get, oh, that's a Livestrong bracelet. Where can I get one, right? So I just said, hey, John, do you have a Livestrong bracelet on? And he answered my question by saying, would you like one? I have a closet full of them. And that struck me because I didn't ask him a question. All I said was, you have a bracelet on. I was going to start a conversation that would eventually get to, where do you think I can pick one up?
but he answered a question that I didn't ask. And then when he said, you know, I have a closet full of them, it was one of these moments in my life that it's still an emotional thing to think back of that, which is now almost 10 years ago, where it was a sign to me, in a sense, I felt, that you don't need to run this. I've got your back, I've got your daughter's back, it's gonna be okay. And I remember when he said, you know, I've got a bunch of them, do you want some? I wound up getting one for each family member. I just sort of, there were a bunch of people around, I just sort of excused myself and I walked over and I just sat down on a lawn chair by myself with a lot of commotion. No one was paying attention to me. I just started crying because I was just overcome by what I like to call a God moment. Why not? And it was this, you know, this lesson, almost like a little child has to learn a lesson. And I felt like a little child, but in a good way, that I had to learn a lesson at that moment, that you do not have to micromanage other people's lives or your own life. What you have to do, and you have to work on it because it doesn't come naturally, you have to trust God. Even when things don't go well, you continue trusting God and you move forward in that, in that life tone, I guess. You move forward like that. Again, you get into all sorts of philosophical things. Does that mean you don't do anything? It isn't like I do nothing now and I'm just gonna sit there and watch for God to show up. But it's more of an attitude of like, I wanna be wise in decisions I make with my family, but I don't have to be afraid. I don't have to fret over it and try to control it and wrap my arms around it. And I think that's the thing that, in retrospect, I had been learning in bits and pieces for many years up to that point. And that was like a moment where I said, okay, I'm really gonna try now. I think I get it. Thanks for knocking me upside the head one more time that I needed, in the way that I needed to.
Like as a Mr. Smart dude, like how do you, I mean, why was there that God moment? Is that coincidence? Is God coercive? Or?
Yeah, and again, there's always an alternate explanation for this sort of thing, and I don't deny that. So why did I choose to look at it a different way? And again, that's a difficult question to answer because it involves my whole being and my whole life experience. And I was analyzing it myself sitting there on that lawn chair. I was analyzing it saying could just be my imagination conjuring up a reality that doesn't actually exist because it makes me feel better. But then I also thought, coincidence, coincidence, maybe, but maybe not, right? And I made a choice. I'm going to treat this and look at this in an act of trust as a God moment, as that doesn't happen nearly enough, but as a moment, like in the Old Testament, your Ebenezer, your stone of remembering, right? This is the thing you look back on and say, okay, something happened here. I'm gonna keep my eye on that as I move forward, right? And I think it really is a matter of choice. And I think either option, any option is a choice. So if we assume that it's a coincidence and it's our brain habits to sort of construct reality in a certain way, that makes sense if you assume that the natural world is all that there is. And again, I don't assume that. I assume that the world and the universe is much bigger than what we perceive. And I sort of assume that, and I've sort of come, in a sense, to that conclusion as well, I think based on life experiences. There's no voice in my head telling me what's really real and all that sort of stuff, but it's a matter of life experiences, not simply an analysis of reality through one part of my brain, but it's trying to absorb and be present with reality as I experience it and say, you know, I'm going to conclude what so many other people in the history of humanity have concluded, that there is a higher power and that I'm not in charge of the universe. And my little experiences don't dictate what can or can't be.
Why is that good news?
I think it's good news to truly believe that you're not alone. And there is a meaning beyond which what we create. And I do think that we create meaning. I think that, meaning isn't sort of, what's the meaning of life? Well, one answer to that question is what you make of it. But a larger meaning to our existence. To me, that's good news. If God exists, wow. Just look. It's, Carl Sagan's wonderful speech at the end of Cosmos, the pale blue dot. You can switch some language around and look at that and be very hopeful in the sense like, wow. This globe is insignificant and we're just little people. What if God exists that made the cosmos and the galaxies and the stars and dark matter and quantum mechanics and string theory and multiverse, whatever is going on out there? What if there's a God that actually exists and that God actually cares for us and we are, as the Bible says, in the image of God? I think ultimately that's good news. It affects how you live, it affects how you relate to other people. Hopefully not beating them up because you disagree with them. It just affects how you live this life that we have in ways that, if the faith is not corrupted by tribalism, for example, I think it only results in good things and not bad things.